Hey guys, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Really glad you're here today. We're going to have a great time this week, looking back on the final home game for a lot of UGA seniors, looking ahead to a big one on Saturday against Georgia Tech, and then hanging around in Atlanta for another week after that in the SEC Championship. A lot of talk about a lot of football left to play for Georgia. It begins with a reflection on just how much Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, the other Georgia seniors have meant to this program. Glad to have you with us as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Well, that was just about storybook for the Georgia seniors on Saturday, especially the two running backs on offense. Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, they combined for 5 touchdowns, and incredibly impressive performance from those guys. And really, it was one of several storylines probably going on at the same time when it comes for Georgia on Saturday. You had the final chance to appreciate those guys. We talked about that a lot on DawgNation Daily really over the last couple of weeks, to sort of settle in and just watch them one more time and see these guys and how much they've meant to the program. But while that was going on, there was also the need to kind of shake off the hangover of the Auburn game, the disappointing performance, Georgia's only loss of the season, but there's still that, as a lot of players described it, bad taste in the mouths of a lot of Georgia players. They wanted to kind of get that behind them. And I think there was this need, at least maybe it's a perceived need, maybe it wasn't an actual need, but kind of a perceived need to also indicate that this team is ready to bounce back on the field and play much better the next time it plays an elite opponent in the SEC Championship game, and also, I guess, to a certain extent, get some revenge against Georgia Tech on Saturday, a team that beat it in 2016. So there was a lot going on for Georgia on Saturday against Kentucky, but off the top, before you mention anything else, I think it's probably appropriate to mention just how good these two senior running backs looked on Saturday, especially Nick Chubb, who had the long, 55-plus yard touchdown run late in this game in the fourth quarter, kind of the final highlight play for him in a Georgia uniform at Sanford Stadium. And I thought that after the game that Kirby Smart, his way of describing him was so appropriate. He was asked, hey, how much are you going to miss seeing Chubb do those kinds of cuts and jukes and showing the lateral quickness that he showed on Saturday and the burst to turn small gains into big gains? How much are you going to miss that guy next year? And I thought that Kirby Smart gave a great answer. Here's what he said.
Well, no, I hope Swift can do it. I'll miss him greatly. I thought he had an excellent burst. I thought that long run, I thought he kicked another gear. It looked like, back in high school, it was 100 meters. He certainly looks faster to me this year when he breaks out of there and gets going. But he made, the touchdown run looked like he did that. He kind of 1-2 bounced, and then he hit it, and he's got burst. But, I'll miss him when he's gone. I can promise you that. He's one of the all-time greatest here.
Yeah, I think a lot of Georgia fans agree with exactly what Kirby Smart said right there at the end in both respects. He is going to be missed when he's gone. He's just this dependable guy. And as I said on Friday's show, it's not just, the things that he's done here late in his career contributing to an SEC East title already for Georgia. Think back to 2014 when he really put this team on its back after the Todd Gurley suspension. Chubb in so many ways has meant so much to Georgia. And I also agree with what Kirby Smart says there about him being an all-time great. He is one of the guys that I do think, when you think of the kind of rarefied air of great running backs in Georgia history, I do think you have to put a Chubb in that discussion with obviously Herschel Walker at the very top, but also Todd Gurley and Noshawn Marino and Garrison Hurst, whatever the 4 or 5 best backs are to ever play at this program. I think that Nick Chubb's got to be in that discussion. And what's kind of funny about Chubb's candidacy as an all-time great is that a lot of times all-time greats don't have to be described that way because we already know that about them. The numbers, the accomplishments sort of speak for themselves, or in some cases in college football, the players themselves speak on their own behalf. Nick Chubb's always been something of a soft-spoken guy. Sometimes his running style may not be quite as highlight-producing as other running backs. Sometimes almost easy to forget that he really is one of the great running backs in Georgia history, certainly recent Georgia history, everybody south of the early years of the 80s and Herschel Walker. And so to that point, Kirby Smart also admitted on Saturday that Chubb, not only an all-time great, but frankly, probably a little underappreciated. Here's how Kirby talked about that.
I certainly feel like he's underappreciated. I don't know how you guys feel, but I appreciate what he's done in an era where rushing the ball is really hard. Like, it's gotten harder and harder, and I have no statistics to prove it, but I would venture to say that when Herschel ran for his, he ran for his in an era where there was a lot, like George Rogers, people were rushing the ball for a lot of years. It is hard in the SEC. And I'm not diminishing what Herschel did. I'm just enlightening you to the fact that Nick Chubb has rushed for 3,000-yard seasons in the SEC, which is the toughest conference in the country to run the ball. That's pretty remarkable, and did it alongside another back that is maybe just as talented as he is. So, what would he have done with 30, 40 carries a game? Who knows? But I'm sure his body appreciates it.
And listen, that's the thing. I mean, if this was a different era in college football and Nick Chubb was the kind of featured back, getting a million carries the way that, like, say, Derrick Henry did in Alabama a couple years ago, almost a throwback to a bygone age, I mean, how much bigger and better would Nick Chubb's numbers have looked? And conversely, if Sony Michel had been the featured back for Georgia these last 4 years and he was the guy getting all those carries, I mean, Michelle showed you in 2015, he was able to go in 1,300 yards. Chubb showed you in 2014, he'd get you 1,500. And had they been featured as the full season starting running back in any of these years, they very well both may have knocked on the door of 2,000 yards. Two very special running backs, and a great way for them to go out on Saturday as they combined for 5 touchdowns in the game. And, of course, Chubb, Michel, along with Lorenzo Carter, Davin Bellamy primarily, all teamed up as a quartet that came back to Georgia for their final season. Could have gone in the NFL. Probably none of them would have been first-round picks, but all would have been drafted. Could be playing in NFL stadiums right now and earning NFL paychecks. They chose to come back to Georgia for their final season, and Kirby Smart also reflected on what it meant to have those guys back on this team again this year.
At the time, I don't know, I kind of expected most of those guys to stay. I mean, they probably needed to. They needed to develop. They needed to get better. Needed to improve. And I think they've done that. I think more important than that, they've got something now they would have never had if they left then. Think about the taste in their mouth if they were sitting out there watching this team do this. Now, we would have struggled without some of those guys. But with those guys deciding to return, they're part of history that they would never have been. They're in a senior class that's in the 10 most winningest senior classes with a win tonight, and they got a chance to move up next week. So I think it's special. You don't ever get to have a senior year, and every guy I've ever been around in the NFL, they all say it's never the same. So you better enjoy it as long as you can, because when you play at the next level, it's not the same. There's no passion and love and energy for your team like that.
And listen, I agree with Kirby Smart on the last part. I mean, I'm the biggest college football homer in the world. As I get older, I become less and less of an NFL fan every year and love college football more and more, it seems, every single year. Just different people like different things. I'm obviously obsessed with college football in a way that I've never been about professional football. So I agree with him on that last point there. And I also agree that by those guys coming back, they are a part of a special season. And they probably would have been a little sad if they couldn't be with this team in Atlanta and Mercedes-Benz Stadium next week for the SEC Championship, or I should say 2 Saturdays from now in the SEC Championship. There is something special gained by them, for them, coming back, and they certainly gave something to Georgia to come back one more year. And at this point in time, let me transition the conversation a little bit, because one of those guys of that 4 that did come back, Davin Bellamy, also talked about the game when it was all said and done on Saturday. But here's where we got to start changing the conversation from, hey, let's be nostalgic and let's reflect back on how much of these guys have meant to Georgia. As Davin Bellamy reminds us, there is still a lot left to be done, and the ultimate way this team's going to be judged is by how it performs here in its final at least 3 games, maybe even 4 games before the season is done. Here's a great reminder from one of the guys that Kirby Smart was just discussing, linebacker Davin Bellamy.
Not yet, man. Not yet. Man. We came back for a bigger purpose, and we're still working towards that. I mean, everything's nice right now, but it's all about how you finish.
I mean, isn't that the perfect way to kind of close out this portion of the discussion? As great as Sanford Stadium was on Saturday, and as many pleasant memories as Chubb and Michel and Lorenzo Carter and the entire crew had provided so much, the best memories may still be yet to come. And the ultimate legacies of all these guys, Chubb and Michel included, is still to be decided. The next few weeks are going to decide it, and I, for one, cannot wait for those games to get here. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to have you with us, whether it's on video at 10 a.m., on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, or anywhere podcasts can be found. You can watch or listen any time of the day or night. We'll post the show for you there at DawgNation.com, at iTunes. We try to make the podcast easy for you to find, and and we appreciate you doing that. Also appreciate you continuing to share the show on Twitter. At my Twitter account, at DawgNation Daily. I've been tweeting out links to the show. You've been retweeting those. And I have been drawing from the list of retweets, at least someone on our staff has been drawing, a name so we can give away one of our coveted Own the East t-shirts each and every day here on DawgNation Daily. We'll continue to do that while supplies last. Of course, on Friday we talked about sweeping the East. Georgia went out and did that Saturday against Kentucky. And we'll continue to celebrate Own the East here as Georgia gets ready to move on to the SEC Championship in just 2 Saturdays. Congratulations to today's winner. First name, Brian. I don't know Brian's last name, but he's a great supporter of us here at DawgNation and DawgNation Daily. His Twitter handle is at GeorgiaBoy1900. He's also an Army veteran. We appreciate Brian being a great supporter of us here at DawgNation and DawgNation Daily. And Brian, at GeorgiaBoy1900 on Twitter, we'll be reaching out to you and letting you know just how you can get your very own Own the East t-shirt. And don't forget, I'll tweet out the links, the audio version, the video version. Retweet that from me at DawgNation Daily on Twitter, and we'll draw another name for another Own the East t-shirt winner on tomorrow's program. So good to have you with us here as we move towards Thanksgiving on Thursday and the clean old-fashioned hate on Saturday. Before we kind of look more ahead to that kind of stuff, though, let me also go back to Saturday's game against Kentucky just a little bit and hear a little more from linebacker Davin Bellamy, who I have to say, that was pretty poignant on Saturday. We heard from him a minute ago saying, hey, we got unfinished business. We still got things that we got to be done. We still got a lot to accomplish this year. The Kentucky game is not the end of the story. It's just the sort of end of the beginning, if you will. The most important games may still yet to become. He also talked about, after the game against Kentucky, about why that game was, though, important for Georgia, who has bad memories, unpleasant experience at Jordan-Hare Stadium from the Saturday before. Davin Bellamy talked about why that Kentucky game was a chance to sort of, for lack of a better phrase, reboot the system after the disappointment at Jordan-Hare. Here's a little more from Bellamy. All right, a little bit of an issue there with the Davin Bellamy audio. Apologize for that. But what Bellamy talks about was, if you heard that through the static and interference, that Georgia needed to get its mojo back. That's what Georgia was looking to do in that game, was get its mojo back. Get the other phrase that he used was get the bad taste out of their mouths after the Auburn game. And listen, we all understand that to a certain extent. I mean, I think fans feel very much the same way. Even though fans aren't laying their life down on the line like the way the players are on the field, there is still a certain sense of lost mojo that fans have experienced. I've heard from some of you who've been getting grief from some of your friends and family who are Auburn fans, so we all kind of get that. The blowout win over Kentucky, the way that it was, gives that a chance to happen. But I think that also speaks to some of the things that Georgia still needs to work on coming out of that Kentucky game. And when Chip Towers is going to be here with us in a moment on DawgNation Daily, we're going to talk to him some more about some of that kind of stuff. Because while Georgia, as Davin Bellamy said in the clip that I tried to play for you, needs to get its mojo back, I think there is, if you'll pardon the honesty here, an extent to which Georgia's getting its mojo back is still something of a work in progress. I mean, I still saw some things on Saturday that concerned me just a little bit, and I'm guessing that in the midst of feeling great about the Georgia seniors going out in style with a big win, there is also probably some things that still concern you just a little bit. The very conservative play calling on first down in the early portion of the game. What was it? 9 consecutive runs on first down to start the game from Georgia. We know Jake Fromm can handle the load of the quarterback position. It'd be nice to see Jim Chaney give him a chance to do a little more of that right now, especially as a dress rehearsal for what's yet to come in the SEC Championship, the Tech game this Saturday and beyond. So much of the passing plays that were called being targeted in Javon Wims' direction. Is that a concern? Wims had 6 catches on Saturday. All other Georgia receivers combined for just 3. So Wims himself had twice as many as every other Georgia receiver combined on Saturday. Is that a game plan that's going to be too easy for either Kevin Steele or Jeremy Pruitt to stop when they face off in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium? I think that's a fair question worth asking. Once again, it does put a little bit of extra pressure on Jim Chaney here to dial up something offensively better than maybe what he did in the Auburn game. And then once again, an example of just too many penalties from Georgia on Saturday. Davin Bellamy talks about wanting to get the mojo back for the team. Well, part of that mojo would seem to be returning to the discipline and order that was the hallmark of this team before the Auburn loss. Whatever door was open in that Auburn game remained at least ajar on Saturday against Kentucky because too many penalties gave Kentucky too many opportunities here. Now, I have no doubt that Georgia's going to be a better team on Saturday against Georgia Tech than it was really in either of the last 2 weeks, including the big win against Kentucky. And I think that Georgia's going to come up, show up, and be ready to go against the SEC West winner in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in a couple of weeks. But it is worth pointing out there were a couple of examples on Saturday where Georgia fans may have had seen once again some of the offensive stuff they did not like against Auburn. That's only fair to point out. But Dogs do get a big win against Kentucky, and one of the guys that contributed to that win was another Georgia senior. Aaron Davis coming up with a big second-half interception that really sealed the deal for Georgia and allowed the Dogs to cruise to victory there in the fourth quarter. Of course, after the game, Kirby Smart also proud of the contribution from that senior. Here's what Kirby said about Aaron Davis.
Well, he's a great leader. He's a great kid. He's really smart. I think he'll be CEO of some company one day because he's a business major. He's incredibly bright. He understands every position. He plays corner star and even played safety this week. I mean, he's talented mentally and really proud of the play he made because he went up and high-pointed the ball, and proud that he decided to return and continue to play. And he is one of those seniors that has impacted the younger players because we want the younger players to understand the standard that's been set by the older players, and that's got to be ingrained in how they practice and how they grow.
Of course, that game-saving moment is brought to you by Aldi, the supermarket that saves you money. With Thanksgiving coming up, you want to think about those weekly fresh meat specials every Wednesday at Aldi. When you see the sign, you'll find extra low prices and the very best cuts of meat. But hurry, because at these low prices, the weekly supply is limited. Great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily. Hope you enjoyed Chip Towers right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And let's say hello to Chip Towers here on a Monday on DawgNation Daily. Great coverage from him of the Kentucky game on Saturday, and one of the final times, the very final time in Athens, that he'll write down Nick Chubb and Sony Michel's name in the stories that he produces post-game. Chip, let me say good morning and just ask you, when I look at those two senior running backs, they both combined for 5 touchdowns on Saturday. You have the big performance there. I mean, I think they both put themselves in the category of some of the all-time greats that have played their position at Georgia. And after the game, Kirby Smart was certainly saying that. I'm imagining you're in agreement on that, too, that number 1, number 27, pretty special running backs for the Dogs, right?
Yeah, it's really amazing that, they've both been here this whole time. And when you put into context what Nick Chubb has done in his career, and at this point pretty much only Herschel Walker stands ahead of him in pretty much anything, and then you balance that with the fact that, he was sharing carries with Sony Michel that whole time. Sony Michel, who's 6th nationally right now in yards per carry at 7.37, scores 3 touchdowns in that game. Nick Chubb, 2 of them. I mean, it was a perfect send-off, and what makes it great is they're just such good friends. I mean, roommates, teammates. They clearly care about each other. Great friends. They've done it together, and I think, as a result of the way that they've coexisted at Georgia, it's going to help them both at the next level. From a physical standpoint, I think it was clear with Nick Chubb on Saturday that speed that we were, so amazed by his, freshman and sophomore years, looks like that's fully restored. And then Sony Michel, who's just had some absolute wow runs several times, including that one where he dived for the pylon Saturday. Georgia really lucky to have those two guys, and it just keeps rolling on with Zamir White on his way, and E.J. Smith, Emmitt Smith's son, was given an offer and was in attendance of that game this past Saturday, and on and on and on with DeAndre Swift and those other guys. The tailback tradition is strong and everlasting with Georgia right now.
And it's funny, I meant to mention this. I'm glad you brought up E.J. Smith, Emmitt Smith's son being there on Saturday. My understanding is, Chip, that Georgia became the first school to offer him a scholarship, offering him before Florida did. They at least offered him before Florida did, and I believe they were the first school to sort of extend that scholarship offer to him. And if that right there doesn't speak to the difference between the two programs right now, I know a lot of Georgia fans are still kind of licking wounds after losing to Auburn, but Georgia, by maintaining continuity with Kirby Smart here and the way that the program seems to be growing under him in year 2, a real stark contrast to a Florida team that's in such disarray with the coaching search right now that they can't even offer a scholarship to Emmitt Smith's son yet.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. Who's going to offer it right now? Randy Shannon? I mean, that's a a mess down there, you know, and it was Emmett looked so uncomfortable to me on the sideline. I mean, they were, you know, when I saw them, they were obviously intently watching the tailbacks warm up before the game, and you could tell it was a very businesslike thing. But you know, I was like, "How you doing, Emmett?" You know, and I don't know. He just, you know, he's like, "Oh no, you recognize me?" I don't want anybody to see me here. But you know, that's what it's all about is you know, opportunities for your kids. I mean, it's just like you know, I don't know if your child wanted to be an engineer, but you were a Georgia graduate and they wanted to go to Georgia Tech, you'd probably be okay with that, right? And I think if you're Emmett Smith and your son wants to be a tailback, Georgia's a pretty good place to land.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right. Let me talk to you about some of the concerns that I had coming off Saturday's game. And listen, I was as happy as anybody to see Georgia sweep the East and, you know, finish out undefeated home schedule. There's a lot to like from the game against Kentucky, but as Davin Bentley kind of talked about the team getting its mojo back, I feel like that return to mojo may be a bit of a work in progress here. What did you think about what I think of as sort of excessively conservative play calling on first down in the early portion of the first half here? I believe the count that you and Seth had with 9 consecutive first downs were running plays. Is that too conservative for Georgia on first down, or is that just an example of a team doing only what it needed to do against an overmatched Wildcats team?
You know, I'm going to give Jim Chaney the benefit of the doubt here and say he was setting all that up for what happened in the second quarter. You know, he was just trying to establish a trend to trick Kentucky into when they finally switched to some first down passes in the second quarter. Yeah, I mean, you know, yeah, it was 9. It was 8, official plays in the book, and then another one that got negated due to a penalty. So 9 consecutive first down calls. And you know, I get it. That's what Georgia's about. But I'd love to see them play action fake to start a game. I mean, they did. I think maybe it was Florida or one. You know, there was at least one game I know they ran a play action fake to Nick Chubb on that, you know, right or left guard zone read that they seem to run so often. But yeah, I mean, you know, you got to shake it up. And once they did, I mean, there's no smoke and mirrors about what happened. Once they started throwing on first down, Fromm started completing those passes. That, you know, loosened up the Kentucky defense, and then all of a sudden Georgia could run. So sometimes you got to, you know, establish the run to set up the passes. Sometimes you have to run the pass to pass to set up the run, and the latter was what worked for them on Saturday. It was kind of, I mean, I'm like you, Brandon. It was a weird game. It was certainly what Georgia needed in terms of establishing confidence and you know, returning to their mojo, as Davin put it. But you know, a close look. I mean, that's a 2-score game heading into the fourth quarter. So you know, there were a lot of good things in there, but there were some not so good things too.
And I think that you brought up a point about saying, hey, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt as a way of setting up what happened in the second half. The truth is Georgia has done that already this year. If you go back to the Mississippi State game, and I may get the facts a little bit wrong on this, but my belief is, you know, they run flea flicker to start that game, and I believe that was the only time up to that point in the year that Georgia had thrown when it had lined up under center, that every other play before that under center had indeed been a running play. And I may not quite have that right, but certainly the overwhelming majority of the play calls under center had been running plays before that. Then the flea flicker leads to a touchdown against a pretty good Mississippi State team. So what you're saying may be more than just giving, you know, a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. It may actually be true that Georgia was being conservative as a way of setting up something either against Georgia Tech or in the SEC championship, or maybe even beyond after that.
Well, I mean, there's no question that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, if you can advance the ball running it, it's the best thing overall. And, you know, that's going to be a real interesting sort of philosophy to watch against Georgia Tech because, you know, part of you thinks that you should be able to throw them, these guys. But, I mean, Duke just ran for, 350 yards or 18 yards or something like that against them, and I don't know about you, but I can't name the first tailback on Duke's team. But I know Georgia has a few pretty good ones, and so you know, I would imagine they'll try the same thing. And certainly, we're at the point now, Brandon, where Georgia has a little bit to play for, as you might notice. So they may, you know, be kind of conservative in their game plan against Georgia Tech. Now, Kirby would never admit that. Nobody's going to say that, but I would think it was one of those things, if you can just be as simple as possible and take care of business against Georgia Tech, you want to be able to carry some wrinkles into that SEC championship game, because whether it's Auburn or Alabama, I think you're going to need some wrinkles to get, out of that one with a victory.
I don't want to be too negative. I really don't, because I think Georgia's got a lot to like right now and a lot of reasons to think it's going to be on a high note here moving towards the end of the season. But another concern I had coming off of Saturday was, Javon Wims has 6 catches. All of the Georgia receivers combined for just 3. I believe that Hardman had 2, Godwin had 1. Is that too much in the way of targeting one guy there? And does that become – I don't want to look past Georgia Tech here, but does that become a little too easy for a Kevin Steele or a Jeremy Pruitt to say, if we just bracket Javon Wims, the Georgia passing attack is going to be a little more limited at that point?
Well, I certainly think Terry Godwin can do some damage, and certainly Mecole Hardman in a one-on-one situation. But you're right. Javon Wims is a great story this year. I'm going to profile him this week heading into the Tech game. Unbelievable player, and obviously, Jake Fromm's favorite target. But, that's the reason Jake got picked off, on that first drive. I mean, he looked at Javon Wims all the way, and the Kentucky defensive back or linebacker, I can't remember who it was that picked him off. I mean, just read it all the way. It was a very, very simple read. There was nothing to it at all. I mean, he just basically took 2 steps forward and had an easy interception deep in Georgia territory. So, yeah, you got to be careful about that. And I'm sure Jim Chaney and them are talking to Jake about that kind of stuff. You can use that to your advantage again heading into these big games at the end of the year. You can fool a defensive back by looking down Javon Wims all the way, and then at the last second turning the other way and throwing it down the other seam to a tight end. Last time I checked, they still have them, or maybe Mecole Hardman or somebody on the other side of the field. I think Georgia's got a lot more in its arsenal that it hasn't really broken out yet, and again, we're going to start seeing that stuff here pretty soon.
Yeah, one more thing from the game on Saturday, it was probably a little too reminiscent of the Auburn game from the week before, and that's the penalties. Now, Chip, I'll tell you, I have loved Kirby's mindset on some of these penalties this year. His thought that, hey, I'm not going to punish sort of overly aggressive play. There's undisciplined play, but there's also aggressive play, and he doesn't seem to mind the aggressive play. And I like that mindset, but Georgia did give Auburn a lot of yards a Saturday ago, and this past weekend, it did give Kentucky at least 2 15-yard penalties and a few more penalties other than that. I mean, I like Kirby's mindset, but you got to be careful not giving too many yards to your opponent, correct?
Yeah, they've gotten a little sloppy here at the end of the year. I believe it was 7 penalties for 75 yards against Kentucky. That's way too much. Now, you're always going to have some, and certainly the ones that he's referring to, it was like I'm trying to remember, maybe it was Malcolm Parrish who hit the guy out of bounds.
Yeah, that was one of them
against
sure.
Auburn. But that wasn't an egregious one. I mean, he was flying over there trying to make a play. So those are okay. And sometimes you're going to be there a half a second late, rushing the quarterback. Those are good aggressive plays. And then you never can tell nowadays with target penalties. So Georgia's been very fortunate, in that regard. But yeah, Georgia's got. I mean, I think the biggest problem is they got to clean it up. There's been a lot of substitution penalties, false starts, offsides, those kind of things. Julian Rochester's been jumping off the ball way too much, which is just the major no-no for a defensive lineman. And we've seen Andrew Thomas a couple of weeks in a row flagged for false starts. All that's got to get cleaned up when you get down here in championship territory.
So you move ahead to Georgia Tech on Saturday, and Chip, here's what I believe I've observed this year. I think the Georgia Tech game is a big one for Kirby Smart, but maybe not because of the rivalry, but more because of the unusual nature of the Tech offense. Do you remember before the Appalachian State game, 2 weeks before that game, Kirby briefly mentioned that they took some time during practice to work on other offenses they would see during the season? I'm assuming he means Georgia Tech because almost every other offense is, in this day and age, at least somewhat similar. Kind of said the same thing, if I remember correctly, during the bye week as well, and then referenced that even post-game on Saturday, spending some time, working on that during the season. It sounds like Georgia has taken moments here and there to kind of look at this Georgia Tech triple option. Kirby Smart, based on what it sounds like he's sort of let slip from time to time, really wants to do his due diligence to make sure his defense is as ready to go for this thing as possible. Do you get the same read here as well, that Kirby Smart takes that preparation obviously very seriously?
Yeah, well, obviously Kirby is a guy that we've learned. I mean, he takes nothing for chance. He really is a detail-oriented guy. And you remember last year, I mean, heading into that game, Georgia brought in Brian Van Gorder as a consultant and, kind of did all kinds of things that they were trying to prepare for that. I mean, he just didn't see that very much at all over there at Alabama, though they did play Georgia Southern a couple of times. But I mean, it's just as frustrating as of an offense as you can possibly play. It's something you don't see the rest of the week. The blocking schemes are different. The offensive scheme is different. It's a physical style to play. I mean, I even heard some Georgia fans express some concerns to me this week. Just saying. That they're concerned about, ankle and knee injuries, coming out of that playing Tech that last game. That they do cut block. They don't do anything illegal, but they're trying to cut you low. They're trying to block you low the whole game. And when you do, and they try to possess the ball for multiple plays. They want 60, 80, 100 plays. That's a lot of cut blocks, so it's frustrating. So I think Kirby's doing everything he possibly can. I'm sure he's worked on it a lot. He said at the beginning of the year when he was talking about himself, evaluating himself as a coach, he thought there were a lot of things that he needed to improve on, and he was making, concerted efforts to shore up on all those, and certainly losing that Tech game. That was devastating last year. What a horrible way to end the year, and the way it kind of went down too. So yeah, I know Kirby wants to rinse that out of his mouth, and I can guarantee you those seniors like Nick Chubb and Stoney Michel do too.
Well, Chip, if we don't see you again, hope you have a very happy Thanksgiving. Hope you're able to mix some fun and some family time in with what is a big week for Georgia, moving ahead to Georgia Tech on Saturday. Really appreciate you being here this day on DawgNation Daily, and we'll enjoy talking to you again soon.
You got it. Thank you, Brandon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff there from Chip Towers. And, it's funny, with Georgia playing Georgia Tech on Saturday, a lot of Georgia fans will obviously be focused in on the in-state rivalry, the one known as clean old-fashioned hate. But you have something that's going to happen for Georgia on Saturday that you don't have a lot in college football. I'm talking about like some legitimate scoreboard watching, right? I mean, some legitimate, hey, paying attention to what happens at Jordan-Hare Stadium, looking in on that game between Auburn and Alabama, because that's as interesting as any game not involving Georgia has probably been to Georgia fans in quite some time, because, a lot of Georgia fans going to square off and sort of decide, what side they want to be on. Do you want to have the Auburn rematch? Do you want to have a chance to go knock off undefeated Alabama? And, I'm not going to tell Georgia fans how they should feel about this one. I think Georgia fans, should pick the side they want to pick in terms of who they want to play for whatever reason they want to pick. All I can tell you here on DawgNation Daily is my feelings on this for me personally are strong. I do not want to wait a year for Georgia to be able to get a chance at some revenge against Auburn. Now, I can't promise you that Georgia's going to win the rematch. I can't promise you they'll win when the two teams play again in 2018. But, man, I feel like I'm hearing from a lot of fans that want that second chance, and I'm right there with you. I just feel like it's a long time to go with the last memory of the Georgia-Auburn rivalry being 40-17 or whatever it was in Jordan-Hare Stadium 2 Saturdays ago. So, I'm not going to have my orange and blue pom-poms out necessarily, but I'll be glad if Auburn gets a victory there, because I'd love to face Auburn again in the SEC Championship. Let me transition here to the SEC Through. I'll remind you the DawgNation Daily today is brought to you in part by my friends at MyBookie. It's holiday time of year, Thanksgiving on Thursday. Listen, a lot of you spending big money on these groceries. You got to have the big old turkey. You got to have all the food that goes with that. That's a lot of money coming out of your wallet, out of your paycheck every week. Be nice to put some money back in there. How about those football games that are going to take place on Thursday? some of those NFL games, college games, all the actions for you right there where you can play with the pros play at mybookie.ag. I'm talking about the money line, the point spread, the over-under. You can do all that, mybookie.ag. And right now, MyBookie's got a great offer for DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers. You get your first deposit matched up to 50%, but you got to act right now. You got to use the promo code DawgNation, spelled the way it's supposed to be, DAWG, DawgNation, at mybookie.ag. You play, you win, you get paid. Simple as that. mybookie.ag. Make sure you use the promo code DawgNation. Speaking of the Iron Bowl, Alabama does open at MyBookie as a 4-point favorite over Auburn on Saturday. Now, there may have been some movement since then. Probably will be some movement throughout the week, but 4-point favorite is what Alabama opens up against Auburn. And, you know, not only do I sort of want Auburn to win, I have to say, Auburn's been my lean in this game since before the start of the season. I think the Auburn is good. It's something that Auburn is something that Alabama has trouble with. Auburn is good. It's something in which Alabama has some trouble with. That's stopping these high-powered, up-tempo offenses. And I think the injury situation for Alabama at linebacker just makes that tough. I like Auburn as the underdog here. I think getting points makes them a really dangerous team. And, you know, while Auburn may have lost twice, the fact is when you watch the two teams side by side, what have you seen from Alabama that makes them appear to be more dangerous than Auburn? I think that Auburn is just as potentially lethal, and I think good enough to win that game at home on Saturday. We'll pay more attention to that. By the way, speaking of Arkansas, or I should say Auburn, how about weird rumors coming out? SB Nation had this report over the weekend. A lot of folks have kind of suggested this as well, that Gus Malzahn, the current Auburn coach, because of the new athletic director that's coming in, the unrest that he's been met with by some Auburn fans, that he could be looking to go back to his home state of Arkansas, be the next coach of the Razorbacks, because many expect that Brett Bielema to be gone there as an Arkansas coach. One of these wild coaching rumors, we'll do a lot of this today on AT&T SEC Country Live, but a wild coaching rumor would have Malzahn leaving Auburn to go to Arkansas. Now, the SB Nation folks do suggest that if he wins the Iron Bowl, he might stick around at Auburn. But nonetheless, I would not be surprised at all if Malzahn at least takes a look at taking another job, just given the fact that the Auburn position he's in now is very different from what it was when he started. He's been there for a while. Sometimes long-tenured coaches have a little trouble keeping fans happy, and he's getting a new athletic director. Of course, the big coaching rumors, though, coming from both Tennessee and Florida. Let me deal with all of this right now. As I said, we'll do more of this on AT&T SEC Country Live. So Calhoun's, the famous restaurant right there on the river next to Neyland Stadium. There was a report that came out of there on Saturday that John Gruden was eating dinner in the restaurant with Peyton Manning. Now, Manning was definitely there, but the figure with Manning in the dinner table looked like Gruden from behind. Apparently, it wasn't Gruden, though. At least that's what the Calhoun's folks are saying. They initially, I guess, stated that it was kind of a messy situation that a restaurant in Knoxville is having to apologize for saying they saw Gruden. It does seem like, though, there is some reporting, including what SB Nation had over the weekend, that Tennessee has met with Gruden and may only be doing that as a way of kind of a formality to sort of satisfy some of the boosters who want Tennessee to consider Gruden. They may have done that, according to reports, in order to satisfy those folks, but may not be seriously considering hiring him. As Dennis Dodd wrote at CBS Sports on Friday, Tennessee supposedly has some concerns about Gruden, which a lot of times is sort of a leak to get someone off the scent of that being the coach they actually do want to hire. In this case, though, it may be face value. Nobody really knows. But at a certain point, Tennessee ought to have concerns about Gruden. He hasn't coached in a decade, not really any experience at the college level. Does he know how to recruit? He said in the past that he didn't know really, what the recruiting game was all about. It's so weird to me that so many Tennessee fans are so in on Gruden, given the obvious long list of reasons why he might not be successful. I think the same thing is frankly true at Florida here a little bit as well. Final story for the SEC for us to get to is Florida officials, including Scott Strickland, the AD, definitely flew north over the weekend to New Hampshire. The thought is they met there with Chip Kelly, who's living in the Northeast right now as an ESPN analyst. Florida's not saying much about what the meeting in New Hampshire was about, but they can't hide the fact that the plane took off, landed, and returned. Now, Chip Kelly has also been rumored to be involved in the UCLA job opening. UCLA fires Jim Mora. Chip Kelly's previous college experience came out west. Is it more comfortable for him to be back in Los Angeles? He also coached the San Francisco 49ers. Does Kelly prefer UCLA over Florida? There's reasons to think that he would. I think this is also a situation where Florida, as I talked about on Friday's show, looks desperate in a way that it does not need to be. I don't think that Chip Kelly's the best coach you could hire. He's the biggest name, but maybe not the best coach. We'll talk more about that today on AT&T SEC Country Live, and for now, we'll wrap up your SEC through. All right, let me get back to the Georgia Bulldogs here on DawgNation Daily, and one of the big stories from Saturday's game was the insertion of Ben Cleveland, former five-star prospect in the 2016 class, a guy who redshirted last year, a guy who fought like crazy this summer to get some playing time, and apparently whatever fight that Cleveland was a part of during the summer has continued during the season because he earned a spot at right guard as the starter on Saturday. Did not play the entire game. Solomon Kinley also rotated back in with him, but apparently Ben Cleveland got some pretty high marks from Kirby Smart postgame, who's been impressed with the way he's been practicing up until now. Here's what Kirby said about that.
Ben Cleveland's been practicing well. Ben Cleveland competed in practice this week, worked hard. He went with the ones the last 2 weeks. Just, y'all didn't write about it. I mean, it's not like a big deal to us. It wasn't like we said, oh, we couldn't run the ball, we got to make a change. We just went with the guy who practiced best. I mean, Dashawn almost beat out Kendall this week. And next week, Ben might almost beat out Andrew Thomas because he backs him up. So we've got great competition in that position, and I think Solomon's going to respond the right way. He went in and played well, and they'll continue to improve.
The competition that Kirby Smart's so proud of creating at Georgia practice has also been noticed by the guy who won that competition, at least for last week, Ben Cleveland. He talked about getting on the field and the work at practice that allowed him to do that. Here's a little bit from Ben Cleveland. I think you'll like this.
Oh, it was great. I mean, there was great competition all week throughout practice. A lot of hard-fought battles, guys moving around different positions, and, it felt real nice to go out here for these seniors tonight and get my first start and just leave it all out on the line for them.
When you hear the word competition from Kirby Smart or from Ben Cleveland or for any other Georgia player who goes through that during practice, I think there's a word that we also ought to use side by side to that as a bit of a placeholder. Competition symbolizes something that Georgia has this year but did not have last year, and that's options. Last year the Georgia offensive line no doubt really struggled, and Georgia as a team struggled because of that. There was curious play calling, there were upset losses, there were a lot of things that happened to Georgia last season, and at the crux of why things were going badly, I believe was a pretty ineffective Georgia offensive line. But the story behind the story for the Georgia offensive line last season was the absence of options. It wasn't just the five starters were underperforming, sometimes they probably were, but the real story was there were no good options behind them to step up and take their plays. Not only have the Georgia starters here in 2017 played better than last year's group, but there are also options here as well. Kirby Smart, when he took the Georgia job, said he wanted to see more depth along the lines of scrimmage, at least on the offensive side. That's happening. Offensive line is deeper. There are more options. Ben Cleveland won a competition, got on the field, and frankly, Georgia fans are pretty glad to see that. All right, let's wrap up here today on the program. Good to have you with us. Hope you had fun on the show. I will tell you that while we're still thinking about clean old-fashioned hate on Saturday, the in-state rival against Georgia Tech, we never stop thinking about the world's largest outdoor cocktail party here on DawgNation Daily. We never stop counting it down to next October in Jacksonville, 341 days from now, whether it's Chip Kelly or Scott Frost or whoever coaching the Gators. We think Georgia's going to play him. We think Georgia's going to beat him. We think Kirby Smart's going to make that guy maybe regret taking that Florida job. 341 days from right now, that is our Gator Hater Countdown. I'll also remind you to look for some links from me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. Link to the video show, link to the audio version of DawgNation Daily. Please retweet that from me at DawgNation Daily. I'll take all those retweets, put them in a pile, and we'll draw a winner for another Own the East t-shirt tomorrow. We'll keep doing this while supplies last. Thanks for being with us on the show. Hope you all have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow. And for those of you with us right now, we'll look forward to getting some video comments from you. Of course, always appreciate you participating in that, and hope you are all getting ready to enjoy a happy Thanksgiving. I'll give you a little idea about our schedule here. We're going to be just like normal Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. We'll be audio only for Thursday. And then on Friday, I think it all depends if I'm going to be able to talk anybody to coming in. Michael, are you working on Friday? Do you want to work on Friday? He says, sure, because he thinks the bosses might be listening. Hannah, you don't work on Fridays anyway, so Hannah won't be here. So it may just be Michael and me. We'll find out, but we will have in some form or fashion an episode of DawgNation Daily for you on Friday. We'll do that. Will definitely be audio only on Thursday, and regular shows Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So that's kind of an update on some of that kind of stuff. All right, let me get some comments here. Hal Love says, BA, you're right about penalties, no doubt. I've been to a lot of games this season. The refs are not calling games even in every game this season. Case in point again, against Auburn, they called Walker on the, let me scroll to get the rest of this. They called Walker on the jump on the punt. Kentucky did the same thing. I mean, I didn't see Kentucky leap on Saturday. I didn't see that. But one of the reasons why I hate the leaping penalty, the one that DeAndre Walker got called for in the Auburn game, is not only do I not feel like you can legislate safety in football, I just think that's a really difficult thing to do. I think that you're always sort of solving last week's problem. You know, rules get in sort of put into place to sort of fix whatever thing got somebody hurt a season ago or a week ago, and the next problem is always going to be something new, something different, because most of these injuries are relatively fluke. I mean, I just think it's really hard to design a rule book that perfectly protects players from all forms of injury. And I know the lawyers want you to do that, but that's all these rules are. While they say that, hey, this is designed to enhance player safety, what it's designed to, and no one will ever admit this, is to sort of give you plausible deniability in some sort of lawsuit situation to say we tried as hard as we can. I don't know that the rules actually make anyone safer. That's one of the reasons why I don't like the leaping penalty. But the other reason is what Hal the commenter brings up there. There's also a nature in which all of this stuff is so subjective that it's sort of obviously noticed in one play. And in the game against Auburn, Walker definitely did leap. I mean, he was guilty of it. There's no doubt about that. But in other moments, it's maybe not quite as obvious, but by the letter of the rule book, it should be called. Now, I didn't see the Kentucky situation, but that's an example of one of the reasons why I don't like the stuff. And targeting is the same way. It is a noble cause to say we don't want to have as many concussions or neck injuries, and these sort of spearing type hits where the helmet gets lowered onto the crown of the head or above the shoulder. They do create a double negative situation of increased concussions for the guy who gets hit and potential neck injury for the guy who does the hitting. It's a noble cause, but the rule is going to be enforced so subjectively that I don't know that it actually makes anyone safer. It just sort of makes college football at times more frustrating. So I don't know what you do about that. I mean, I'm not callous to the need for additional player safety. I just don't know that these rules actually accomplish the goal that people think they're accomplishing. Eric Moody says the East owned, and there is no simpler or better way to say that. Georgia dominates its division this season. John Young reminds us, though, that Georgia still owns the state. It's time for Georgia Tech to pay their rent money on Saturday. John, I like that phrase. Really good stuff. Mike Mazzell says, happy Thanksgiving. Mike, appreciate that. I know that you are extra thankful this year, given your health issues, but we're glad that you're feeling good again. I hope you're getting ready to enjoy a fantastic Thanksgiving. Tim Tatum says we should take Thursday off, period. So here's the thing. For our holiday shows, we pre-record them. So it's a little, and the one thing that, if you'll allow me to be completely honest, I probably don't get enough credit for, is that when we do a pre-recorded show, now video, you would know if it's pre-recorded, but audio, I mean, we could get away with pretending that we were here on Thanksgiving and just that it's just as live could be. But I've never done that. Even going back to like the early days of DawgNation, if we pre-recorded a show, I was honest in the upfront that we were pre-recorded it. Now, one of the main reasons why that's true is because these recruits have a nasty habit of committing on holidays. I mean, Devois Whaley committed to Georgia on Thanksgiving. Somebody committed on Christmas. I mean, there'll be a commit on Thanksgiving for some major program. These guys just get with their family on the holidays. All of a sudden, they get emotional. All of a sudden, they start tweeting out commitments. That's just the way the things go down. So we'll have a show on Thursday, but if, Alante Taylor commits to Georgia on Thanksgiving night, we're gonna miss it. We'll talk about it on Friday, but we'll miss it on Thursday. So I'll try to be honest about the pre-recorded. We usually do 1 week in the summer as pre-recorded shows as well, and so I tried not to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. Because that's just not the right thing to do. Stacy Goebel says, nice to see hard work paying off for Ben Cleveland. Totally agree with that. Darian Ford says, have a video show on Friday. I've got to work. And that's one of the reasons why I want to do the video show is because a lot of y'all are back at work. Not everybody's like the prima donnas that work behind me that get, Thursday off, Friday off, Saturday off, Sunday off. I mean, a lot of us are, we're workers, we're grinders. A lot of us, have to, show up and, make the donuts every day. So if y'all going to be at work, I want to be at work. Robert Wakefield says, do y'all think that Georgia could go undefeated in the state of Georgia this year? I kind of like that. What do you got? 6 in Georgia? Robert, I'm not going to lie to you. I just now realized what you were saying. So Robert Wakefield's got a great point. He says, what if Georgia went undefeated in the state of Georgia? And I at first thought he meant 6 games in Athens, the game on Saturday in Atlanta against Georgia Tech. But that's not what he means. He also means the following Saturday in Mercedes-Benz Stadium for the SEC Championship. And, oh, yeah, by the way, potentially the early portion of January when the national championship game is also taking place in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. That is a great thought. That is really – I really like that. I probably should have already thought about that, but I had not. Andy Ginn says, don't see us winning the SEC unless Fromm gets better with his reads. He only threw to the right side of the field on Saturday. He's got to go through his progression. So, listen, I mean, I think that Jake Fromm has been better at some of that kind of stuff than maybe some people realize. And I thought that, look, I didn't play quarterback. I didn't coach. So I can't tell you what Fromm's doing and what he's thinking when he's on the field. But I did think that Ollie Conley had a really good piece about this a few weeks ago. We had Ollie on the show to talk about it. And he kind of talked about one of the things that enabled Fromm to be so successful this season. And listen, the numbers speak for themselves on Fromm. They just do. There's no doubt about that. Is that, he is kind of, bunching receivers to one side. And he's doing that, what he called sort of like a triangle progression of, looking at these guys there. And it's allowing him to make a very quick decision. And I think the way that aspect of the Georgia offense has been designed and the way that Jake Fromm's executing, it's really impressive work for a freshman to do. And, the extent to which he's, keeping some plays alive with his feet there a little bit so he can make that throw. I mean, the number of quarterbacks in college football who are sort of surveying both sides of the field equally and, looking at every single spot on the field, there's just not probably a lot of that. I mean, even the guys that are expected to be the first-round picks in this year's draft, I mean, Darnold and Rosen from USC and UCLA, I mean, you think they're doing that on every single play? I mean, how many interceptions has Sam Darnold thrown this year? And I like Darnold as a player, but I mean, this is not a guy that's exactly reading the field with pinpoint perfect accuracy. I mean, Fromm is still a freshman. And in terms of how he's reading defenses, how he's reading the field, I think he's actually doing a really good job with that. Now, I'll admit that the interception on Saturday was a little weird for me. And I don't even know if it was so much weird on Fromm's part, and I'm probably just wrong about all of what I'm about to say, but in the stadium, if you watch it before the play takes place, I mean, there's a chance I'm just completely misreading this. It seemed like the Kentucky defense was way back in a zone, and then the play call was to go empty backfield right there. It seemed like a weird play call to be empty backfield on, and it seemed like one of those plays that was sort of designed to screw up before the start. It almost seemed like Georgia should have. I don't know if you burn a first half timeout for that or what, but there wasn't a whole lot for Georgia to check down into in an empty backfield situation right there with the defense playing back as much as they were. So that was kind of a weird situation. But overall, I think that Fromm's had a really, really good freshman year. J.D. Hall says, what's up with James Cook? Don't hear as much about him as we do Zamir White. I think part of that's just the fact that White's having such a big senior year, putting up such big numbers. And I'm sure James Cook's putting up great stats too. Cook, number 3 running back in the country. White, the number 1. I think this is not a negative about James Cook as much as it is a positive about just how dazzling and impressive Zamir White's been for his senior season. And by the way, to go back to something that some of y'all were talking about earlier in the show, E.J. Smith, Emmitt Smith's son, it is not obvious to me that he will be a running back at the college level. I know there was some debate about that. What I have heard is more of like an athlete type guy, wide receiver, defensive back maybe, not guaranteed to play the running back position at Georgia or wherever he were to go to college. He's a 2020 scholarship offer right now. So it's not obvious, what he would be necessarily, but it just sort of speaks to, the disarray at Florida. They can't even offer Emmitt Smith's son a scholarship. There's no one to extend that offer, whereas Georgia's got this, situation up and running here. I just think it's more evidence of why the Georgia program is on solid, firm foundation right now, and the Florida program's not. And y'all know that I'm not afraid of Chip Kelly at Florida. I think that I don't think that Kelly's some major upgrade in the recruiting department either. This is a strange time to be a Gator. They seem to be oblivious to what made them great in the past, and the more they ignore the talent acquisition skills that made them championship programs, boy, the better it is going to be for the Dogs here in the long run. Alan Verbanchik says, you can do a short Thanksgiving video at your house for those of us that have to work Thursday. So the thing about that is, while I am on Facebook video virtually 24 hours a day. I mean, I did a Facebook video this morning at like 7 a.m. I did the Georgia Dome implosion, the SEC Country Facebook page. There is no moment in time where I'm not on Facebook doing some sort of video, whether it be recorded or live or something. My family not quite as keen on the Facebook video, so generally speaking, they like to keep that stuff in the studio, and they like the home life to be private time, especially at Thanksgiving. Plus, I eat so much on Thanksgiving that I'm probably not wanting to be seen on camera that day anyway. Mike Mazzell says Tech won't come close to beating us. Julie Craig says, what's up with Holyfield? He seems to play well when he's put in, just not getting a lot of opportunities. And, it just sort of speaks to the depth of Georgia at the running back situations. It is about the best I can say that. I mean, I think he's going to get his chance at some point, but right now there's just a lot of good running backs at Georgia. Nicole House talking about some Thanksgiving workout rage. I didn't see what she was saying on that, but remind me of what that was. Katie the Kid says, do you think Jim Chaney's the right coach for the job? He seems predictable. I think that Jim Chaney's what's the word I'm looking for here? Best possible evidence to support his candidacy is performances on the field the rest of the season. That's what Jim Chaney needs. Jim Chaney and the Georgia offense have done a great job beating up on teams in which Georgia was a pretty big point spread favorite here this season. Now, the Georgia offense needs some credit for making themselves such a big favorite in these games because back before the start of the season, most experts did not think Georgia would be blowing out these teams the way that it has been all year long. So the Georgia offense gets some credit for that. But there's no doubt that the Auburn game was not a good game for Chaney. I think Georgia is not as loaded with weapons as it will be in 2018, 2019. But I think it should have enough to be a little more versatile than what it has shown the last couple of weeks. I am, for the most part, a Chaney defender. I am, for the most part, a guy that believes that Chaney has gotten a little bit of a bad rap from some fans. But he needs to validate my defense or the defense of other people by having just some better games here before the season's done. And the one that's going to matter for him most is that first Saturday in December. Cheston Wainscott says going to miss Roquan next year. Boy, I am too. I mean, he's just so good. And my assumption is it'll be shocking, I believe, if he comes back for his final season because right now the expectation is that he will be a first-round draft pick. Now, that's based on mock drafts. Sometimes scouting combines and actual, NFL scouts response a little different than the mock drafts. Mock drafts are heavily influenced by college stats in a way that actual NFL scouts sometimes aren't. Maybe NFL scouts should pay a little more attention to these college stats sometimes, but NFL scouts, for the most part, are sort of operating on a different set of criteria than the way the mock drafts typically work. Media influenced by what's shown on TV. Scouts sort of influenced by different things than that. So maybe if Roquan looks like he's falling out of the first round, maybe he might come back at that point in time. But I just can't imagine he's going to do that. What I've seen is like a top 15 type pick. I mean, frankly, as much as I want him to come back to Georgia, the best advice I could give him is just a observer at football is you can't work your way up higher than top 15. Go get that money, young man. So we'll see. And while I think that a guy like Owen Popo, who's part of the class of 2019, could be the next Roquan Smith in terms of an athletic profile, I don't know that Georgia's got a Roquan Smith on next year's team. If it doesn't have Roquan Smith, and it probably won't. Now, Georgia's going to still be plenty talented, But is there a guy that can do the Roquan Smith stuff as well as Roquan has done it, or as a reasonable facsimile to the way that Roquan's done it? I think that still is to be determined, and likely not. Bobby Kilgore weighing in today. Bobby, appreciate you being here. We'll get a few more comments. Mark Lewis Johnson. Yeah, that was me on air this morning. He says, that was a nice screen that Marta Bus ran on you. What timing? Yeah, so I wish we had this video to show, and I don't think we do. So we get this great shot of the Georgia Dome as it gets ready to come down. We'll show this to you on AT&T SEC Country Live today. Beautiful, perfect shot. Georgia Dome ready to go. And I mean, this is like something from a comedy movie. Right when the dome was getting ready to come down, MARTA bus, that's for those of you who don't live in Atlanta, that's the local transit authority. MARTA bus drives right in front of the dome, essentially blocks most of the implosion while it's taking place, and then drives right on. I mean, it could not have been more perfectly timed. It was spectacular, really, because you have to live your whole life to find something that's like that unintentionally funny. You're ready for the dome implosion. Everybody's tuned in. Everybody's ready to go. MARTA bus right in front of the screen, stops, waits, dome finishes, and it drives right off. So I'm glad you caught that, because that was pretty funny. Pretty funny. All right, we got to get ready to get out of here. AT&T SEC Country Live, 3 p.m. today. That's Eastern Time. Back again at 10 a.m. tomorrow for another episode of Dog Nation Daily Live. A lot of fun heading towards Thanksgiving, heading towards clean old-fashioned hate on Saturday. A lot at stake for Georgia in this one. No Georgia player coach going to look past Georgia Tech. They want to get this win. It's part of that revenge tour that Georgia's kind of been on all season long. So we'll talk a bunch about that. Make sure you retweet from me at DawgNation Daily, a link to one of our two shows, audio or video. We will collect those retweets. We'll draw a name for another Own the East t-shirt tomorrow. Really appreciate you being here today. Thanks for making it a great Monday on DawgNation Daily. Hope you have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you again tomorrow.